Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the History of Fan Anime. I'm your host, William Chow, and today's episode, we're going to get into the part two of a podcast that I had earlier called The Anime in North America. And it basically was a podcast about, the situation of how anime sort of came to North America. And I'm going to go over it, or started going over a big chunk of it in part one. And now I'm going to continue with part two. All right? So before I begin, I want to remind everyone to go down below, click like, and click subscribe. Again, that helps the YouTube algorithm and analytics, do its job and work. I like to thank you for your support. I also have the thanks button down below. If you like this particular episode or the series that I'm making right now, then you can also put your thanks as well there. Plus, also I have other ways that you can support me with through the Patreon and through PayPal, where I've also made exclusive episodes for the subscribers. I'm currently working on the second set of 5 episodes block for those subscribers. So definitely, I'll be trying to post those as soon as I can, finish off that sort of grouping of 5. All right, and so hopefully drop those very soon. So again, you can support me. The links are below. Okay. So today's episode is I'm going to get into more of this particular podcast that came out called "The Anime in America," and again, it's just a podcast going over different things that sort of happened, in the industry of anime as it's just starting to come over to the North American shores. And I'm gonna basically go through it because I've noticed there's several things that are, you know, maybe need to be elaborated on. I wouldn't say they would just say incorrect or anything, but it just should be a little bit elaborated and maybe a little more emphasis has been put on it, as some parts seem to be passed over. So I want to go over kind of with you and give you my take, as I'm one of the people that are sort of was in this, and it very well describes people like me, and I want to see basically how accurate and more concise for that. All right. So, without delay, let's begin. So, why would supposedly passionate fans of a form of media modify it without the creator's permission and distribute bootleg copies of it, essentially committing media piracy? Well, a lot of reasons all boil down to the fact that you just couldn't get it anywhere else. Okay? And what this basically refers to is that, let's say you liked a particular show, let's say Star Wars or something, and you really enjoyed it and loved it, and you like to support the franchise and that kind of stuff. But there's why would you basically make pirated copies of the movies and distribute it to your friends and that kind of stuff, get it around. And although that's how it made it sound, it's not really the quite the painted the accurate picture. You have to realize that again, we're in an era before any sort of electronic communication. So the internet was not existed, right? Again, the way that we know it, the internet to be. Again, we're talking late '80s, beginning of the '90s, right? So even before Windows, like a Windows interface, was available. Even before really, powerful, IBM PCs, existed, right? So if an anime fan, was able to see some kind of anime, let's say, something like Megazone 23, for example, one of the very popular animes, OEVAs that began at this particular time. The only way I could express and tell other people such an OEVA existed, and even show it to them, is I'd actually have to physically make a copy of this, on a VHS tape or something, and be able to basically, give it to them to take to their VCR and put it into the VCR and put it in, and then press play and then be able to see it. it was not just anime that you had to do this with. I mean, I grew up in the era of, the Hong Kong action movies, the kung fu movies, the Bruce Lees, the Jackie Chans and the Sammo Hungs and that kind of stuff. When my parents, here living in Canada, wanted to, see stuff that was in, their native language, in Cantonese, the only way you could really do it is, they had to get someone to record the programs in Hong Kong and then basically, mail it over here to North America, get it converted even, right? Because in Hong Kong it's PAL, and here in North America it's NTSC. And then we were able to then watch, basically Chinese programming in their language and whatnot. Because again, there was no cable service that supplied that kind of information. And I think that this is probably likely for any person that came from a different country and now living and working in another country, for example. In order to get stuff from your home country, you really had to make a copy of it to send it over here to be able to view it. Whether or not that's from, France, sending it to here, or Italian. Greek was also really popular in Vancouver because there was no other way to do it. There's no satellite services. The cable TV networks didn't have programming in other languages other than, of course, the official language for Canada is French. But I'm sure in the U.S., things like Spanish and whatnot is probably the only other language that was, readily available that you could really get maybe in a broadcasted form, right? So if you, wanted to get something that was in, let's say even, something like German or, so let's say even, let's say Japanese in this case, the only way you could get it is someone had to be in Japan or that country to record it onto a tape, whether the audio tape or video cassette, and then be able to physically send it over here for us to view it. Okay, and then if you liked, for example, the video cassette or whatever that you saw, and you want to tell a friend about it or whatnot, the only way they could actually see it is you'd actually have to make a copy of it and give it to them, and then they could play it on themselves. Or you'd actually have to physically invite them over and say, "Hey, we're gonna have a video night or something, and we're gonna show some various Japanese animation. In this case, it was watch kung fu movies or something. That was really the only way to do it. So to say that it is, bootlegging copies, yeah, sure, if by the letter of the law, that's what it was. But again, in this era, making copies of things onto VHS tapes and that kind of stuff was a very common thing to do, because it was the only way that you could actually show other people, this other stuff that, again, wasn't available in this country. There's no Japanese TV stations. There was no cable networks or anything that broadcasted Japanese programming. So, not like we're stepping on anybody's toes or not, cutting into anyone's profits or anything like that. This is just really so obscure that this was the only way to do it. Anime in the late 80s and early 90s was pretty scarce, and he's 100% true. He said the first OVAs came out in more or less than 84, 85, right? So that, even with 5 years worth of difference, it was really tough to get anime over here, right? Because again, the physical media was the only way to transport it here. So unless you had like a small Japanese town or like Japantown type of thing, like international district like you have in Seattle, or if you knew someone who was Japanese who wanted to get that little taste of home and a little home programming, that kind of thing, and that kind of mail ordered tapes of Japanese tapes and that kind of stuff for part of their care packages, shall we say. There was really no way to get Japanese animation over here, right? Or anything from a foreign language over here. It was still unproven in the American market and all over the world, but that's another podcast. And he's kind of right, anime really still hasn't proliferated all over the world in a large format yet. I mean, sure, in Canada we had a couple things like Sing Du Katsai and Captain Harlock, Star Blazers Yamato type of thing. Has kind of proliferated here in Canada. I'm sure over in France, Cat's Eye, the Three Musketeers and that kind of stuff sort of proliferated over there. So it's kind of a hit and miss in a lot of different parts of the world. That's for sure. So it was being licensed in a few small kinds of shady companies. He's referring to Harmony Gold, who's basically trying to, really did a really horrible job, in terms of keeping it, authentic to the Japanese creation, of course. They were very selective of what they could invest in. Again, it was really tough because there's no real barometer to determine how well an anime would do with fans. Because again, they didn't poll people. Where are these anime fans coming from? Again, a lot of us came from the comic sort of scene. Some people came from the science fiction scene. Some people came from the Star Wars, Star Trek, again, sci-fi type of thing. And some people came from like furries and that kind of stuff. So who do you market this thing called anime to, right? So it was really, really tough to really get a gauge of what we which should license, right? And also the choice of animes were really, really selective, right? I mean, right at the very beginning was things like, Area 88, Megazone 23, with something like Birth, or with something like, there were different animes like, Captain Tsubasa Soccer. I mean, would that actually sell in North America? So it was very, hard to decide what kind of things could you possibly sell in North America. On top of that, a lot of anime distributors were very confused why a country like America would be even interested in their work, which is an obstacle that would take years of negotiation and increasing international VHS and DVD sales to overcome. It still persists on some level even now. And, you're 100%, you got to think about it, right? Here, somebody in Japan is, creating this manga and creates this anime. Let's say it is about, Japanese people living in Japan, a very, very distinctly Japanese show, say, for example, like Orange Road, okay? Why would a U.S. company, like, a company foreign, be interested in a show that's situated in Japan about Japanese people? Why would they want to spend money and license this particular thing for their particular country? I mean, sure, you're making money that you probably never ever would have expected, but they are scratching their head. And for that reason, some companies just were very hesitant to say, well, I'm not comfortable releasing the rights or that kind of stuff to be released in this particular kind of country, unless maybe the dollar value of the thing was high enough, and enough years of time has passed by that maybe they totally forgot that hey, this Orange Road thing is probably like 10 years old now, and it's like, yeah, sure, why not? They're not doing anything with it, so why not? If some country, a company like Anime is willing to give us hundreds of thousands of dollars to license this thing for several bunch of years, sure, why not, right? In the end, it was just a textbook case of demand outstripping the supply. So much so that fans went through all this trouble despite fan subbing being, as you'll soon learn, a very big pain in the ass. He's basically referring to the fact that, yes, when the markets started growing, the word of anime starting to spread, a lot of people started these fan clubs, all these networks and tape trading lists started being promoted, and people started distributing copies of Japanese animation around. Now again, it was in the beginning it was just straight Japanese, no English dubbing, no English subbing, of course. And we just traded the stuff in raw Japanese around with each other, right? But one of the things that sort of often occurred was basically, wow, this is great that we're just we've kind of on this precipice of learning Japanese animation and that kind of stuff. But just like anything else, well, if we could get past the language barrier, I think more people would be interested in this kind of stuff, right? And I think it would, obviously this would apply to just about anything. I mean, would people maybe watch more, Chinese martial arts movies and that kind of stuff if, they got some translation so that they could figure out, what's exactly the reason why, these, martial arts fights are happening. I mean, sure, the action's pretty cool, but, maybe there's some backstory that we could, learn on it. Or maybe, for example, the popularity of Bollywood movies, maybe a little bit more popular if people knew, the background or the lead up to all the various different dancing and music and that kind of stuff that's in those. So anime is the same sort of way, I mean, sure, there's lots of, guns, gore, and girls. Again, that was the big formula back then, the 3 Gs. But maybe there's also a little bit of story that, would be great to know what will be going on if we can just get past that language barrier. And so, this entire, possibly this idea, this thought that wouldn't it be great if it's, if we could somehow apply subtitles. And again, we some, of the Chinese movies that we were getting from Hong Kong at this time had some of these really, really poor, but they were English subtitled, okay? I remember some of the first Jackie Chan movies I remember seeing had these really, sort of film-like glowing subtitles on them. But they, and they were horribly grammared, and the sentences were really, really broken. But they were still kind of in English, and they were just enough to make the story clear. And so, the thought became, well, if the Hong Kong guys making it for, kung fu movies were doing that, why couldn't we do the same thing with, like, Japanese animation and kind of, get some kind of subtitle on it, and, whatever the system we didn't know at that time, but we figured, okay, if we could just at least do that, then more Japanese animation fans, might get interested in this anime thing, and it wouldn't be such a hard sell to basically get people more interested into this anime, and maybe more anime would be available. Okay, and in theory, it's a good idea, and you're right. It's going to help increase the distribution. But as a lot of people, kind of didn't know about, and this is why I'm basically making these type of things, is to help people realize that yes, this was a great idea, but one of the things that a lot of people are missing is that in this era, it wasn't easy. In the early 90s, the technology for burning subtitles onto a VHS or Laserdisc was prohibitively expensive. So most fan-subbing groups rose out of college anime clubs because universities at the time had the highest concentration of both anime fans and expensive and incredibly specific technology. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of cravat to this because that's not 100% correct, okay? Yes, the equipment to get do subtitles is really expensive, whether it was on the Amiga or for a Mac. With paired up with the Genlock is very expensive. There are a lot of anime clubs that do come from universities and that kind of stuff. That's not because the universities had the equipment and that kind of stuff. No, very, very few universities, maybe colleges that did media works and like production of like TV studios and that kind of stuff. Maybe has subtitling type equipment for broadcast classes and that kind of stuff. But it is true. The highest concentration of anime fans and the expensive, incredibly specific technology is not because they went to university. No. The reason why the highest concentration of anime fans came out of things like universities, institutions, and that kind of stuff is because those are the only places that regular people had access to this thing called the internet. Okay, not mainly news groups, anime.rec.arts and that kind of stuff. But yes, as a regular person, there wasn't really a lot of dial-up services that gave you the internet. So the only way you could be, easily accessible to an internet is, for example, going to a university or a library or that kind of institution. Then you basically got assigned an email address because you took computer sciences, for example. And then, you would have a berkeley.edu, for example. I had a ubc.bc.ca for example. You know, Rutgers would be rutgers.edu, for example. ucla.edu, for example. Okay, so as a regular person, that would be the only way you get the access. And again, because you had these students were obviously looking for lots of free time, that stuff when between doing their projects, they also were able to access this anime channel. Now, the only other people who are able to access this would be people that was part of a government installation. Okay, so part of the part of the military, part of big sort of government groups like NASA. So you'd have the NASA.gov, maybe things like the IRS and whatnot. You'd have the .gov things. Other than that, you'd be part of a major organization, okay, or a company, apple.com, and you'd have a .com address, for example, microsoft.com, yahoo.com, although they didn't make the search engines and that kind of stuff quite yet, but that was one of the things that you do. So again, we're talking about very educated people, very highly people who are in the internet business and that kind of stuff. Very, very techie type people, generally speaking, were anime fans at this particular time. Okay, so they're interviewing someone called Savakis. In order to make a fan sub, you had to have a device called a Genlock, which actually would pass the video signal through a computer and overlay graphics on top of it. It would like key out one of the 16 colors that the computer was displaying, and they would replace that with whatever video signal was underneath it. Okay, so he's basically referring to one of the pieces of equipment is obviously this thing called the Genlock, and unlike the computers nowadays where you're able to load the video and all the processing is done inside the computers are too slow at this time. Like I said, here we're using things like Amigas. We're using, we're using the early version of the Mac computers, right? Back in that was like the Mac SEs and whatnot at this Powers PC type Macs, right? And this thing called the Genlock. So all the processing had to be done inside the Genlock, okay? And this device acted and behaved in real time. There's no data storage. There's no video storage in it. It's just basically you fed the video signal in. This Genlock device would take, the elements of your TV, your computer screen, where your subtitles were, and the elements of your video screen coming out of the VCR or from the Laserdisc, and somehow superimpose them together and make it so that, and key the certain colors together, and then basically output a video signal that contains the composite of both of them together. The trick is, it had to do it in real time. Okay, so there's no data storage, there's no processing time in this thing. It has to be instantaneously done. If you didn't have access to a Commodore Amiga or a Genlock, the two would put you back somewhere to the tune of $3,000, or the equivalent of about $5,000 in 2019 dollars. So, which is true, it's really expensive to get to start. And the only way I found out is that I went to the computer store and I asked, what would you do, to get this kind of, subtitling equipment. At this time, I went down to the San Diego Comic-Con and I met up with Robert Gutierrez over at the Ranma Project, and he was using an Amiga. So I thought, okay, well, all I have to do is just sort of get the same kind of setup as he does, and then, we can make, subtitles and that kind of stuff. So when I got back to Vancouver, went to a computer store that sold that kind of stuff, and found out, damn, it is expensive. So it was difficult hobby to get into unless you worked in the audio video industry, or were attending a well-funded college, or had FU money and a lot of free time, which not many people had. So let's kind of go over this a little bit. So it is a difficult hobby to get into if you worked in the audio industry. So he's obviously referring to the fact that, the people who wanted to get into fan subbing, okay, yes, you really had to be, i.e., crazy, because you're spending a hell of a lot of money. unless it's a very you were in very very good circumstances. But that's not to say that if you're interested in Japanese animation, you know if you were willing to join a club or just find things that, done locally, you could still probably get and watch different anime and that kind of stuff. This is just referring to the fact that if you want to get into quote anime fan subbing, okay, specifically, yeah, you were a very special breed of person. He mentions you worked in the audio video industry, so basically, you know, you were maybe in a TV studio, maybe one of these independent college TV programming that type of things, or a lot of things that did closed circuit TV, so they'd basically run video and then they'd run announcements and that kind of stuff over the video type of thing. Maybe if you had access to that, then they would have the equipment. Okay. We're attending a well-funded college. Well, not necessarily if you went to a well-funded college would you have access to this kind of stuff, or you could do this, right? Obviously the college would have to be, would have a class or something in public broadcasting. So maybe a sort of a campus TV station where they had classes on how to be a TV producer or something like that or whatever, and would have such equipment that you could use to do fan subbing. Again, very very few colleges had that. Okay, I did not run into very many people that were in that kind of situation. A lot of people, as I said, most people I actually ended up having to do the things like fan subbing and that kind of stuff had to have their own equipment, right? Just because the amount of time they needed to use, which we'll get into later. Okay. I might have to do this in another episode because I'm already over 20 minutes. So there's going to definitely be a part 3. So make sure you're subscribed below for that. Or I had FU money and a lot of free time. Okay, so I would go and say that I'm in the last category. At this time, I was going to University of BC. My parents and my scholarships, basically made my trip already there, so I didn't have any expenses in that way. I lived at home in a house that the parents bought, so no problem. I'm living at home, no expenses there. Did not own a car, so no insurance or gas payments and that kind of stuff, or car payments, so nothing there. So basically, I had no expenses. Okay. So I ended up getting a part-time job working at Radio Shack, okay? And the money I got from that was essentially pure spending money. I could use that to go out and eat dinner and hang out with friends and that kind of stuff. But also, very most importantly, was able to buy this expensive equipment without actually, incurring that. Now, take for granted, of course, Radio Shack, pays really crap. And, so of the $600, I maybe even 500 something that I got every 2 weeks. It took me 4 or 5, maybe even 6 months to save up enough money to actually buy all the stuff that was needed. But sure enough, eventually enough, things like credit cards help out. But yeah, sure. I managed to assemble the equipment and quickly got started. Okay, now. Obviously the next chapter is going to talk about software, and then but I'm gonna have to save that for the next episode because I'm out of time. So again, make sure you hit subscribe and that kind of stuff. And again, I'd like to thank all the people that are on the Patreon and that kind of stuff. I really appreciate your guys' support. And again, if you want to get into more of these these special subscriber episodes where I talk about things that I can't talk about on YouTube and can't show the same way on YouTube. Definitely you want to be one of the Patreon subscribers, and you get access to all that. All right. So again, make sure we get more of this thing, and we'll talk more about the software in the next episode. Okay, so I hope you found that very interesting. And again, this is a great way to find that other people sort of have the same sort of views and has sort of trying to document it on paper. And I think this is one of those situations where people are trying to write an account of what's sort of going on, or try to report on something, and then without getting all the information together, and without actually trying to get all the the sources and that kind of stuff, to help make it a little bit more concise. this is what happens. It kind of becomes very, very topological. So I'm glad that I've gone through and found this article, and I'm going to go through it with you to sort of let you know that other people also see this sort of development and that kind of stuff happen in the industry as it grows here in North America. All right. So again, we're getting more episodes about the history and that kind of stuff as I got some more fan letters, and I also got some. Managed to find some of the first couple of fan letters that I actually sent out when I first got into this hobby. I managed to keep a couple of the letters of some of the first people that I actually sent letters to. So again, make sure you're subscribed, and then I'll go and get into those episodes very shortly. All right. So until next time. See you again.